Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me in the back? Oh, now you certainly can. I'll stop yelling. My name is Shawn Wildermuth. We're going to talk about what's new in .NET developers. I want to get sort of a sense of the room. How many people are primarily .NET developers? It looks like almost all of you. Great. So your job here is to correct me when I start typing things wrong. You know that, right? I love pair programming with 100 people. A little about me, I'm a Microsoft MVP, Docker captain, ... You can see this. I recently relocated to the Netherlands so that I could be closer to the conferences I want to do. So I'm glad to be back at this conference after a number of years. And we're going to just talk about C# 14 first, and then we're going to drop down into .NET 10. We have 40 minutes, and there's no way I could cover everything that's new. So I've sort of pick the things, some small, some large, that I think are the most interesting, and you'll be the judge of whether that's true or not later. C# 14 introduces a new extension syntax and types of extensions, and we'll show you what that looks like. There's a new keyword called field, name of on unbounded generics. I'll show you what that looks like as well. Null conditional, which is the happiest I've ever been at a C# feature in a long, long time. And partial events and constructors. So we're gonna, whoops, that was way too far. Where did all my windows go? So I'm running in Visual Studio, though this could be Visual Studio Code. And I've just got a simple person class, nothing really special. And I want to add an extension to this. This assumes that I don't have access to just write it here, right? We're all going to just pretend for a minute that this is in some other library that I can't touch. And so the way we've been doing it for a long time is create a static class, extensions, or whatever you want to call it, and then public static string, full name, this person, right? And then I can just return person.firstname, person.lastname. And I know whenever you do full name, it's way more complicated than this. Just this is for brevity. And so I should be able to now come over here to my person and just call person. Come on, Shawn, this is just a keyboard. You're at it every day. I don't do it standing much, right? Because we only have extended methods at this point. This is what I would have to do, and I can just write line full in case we ever run it, right? Well, I think it was actually C# 13 we introduced as a option that you could opt into, this new way of doing extensions that are a little easier. And in 14, they've added property extension properties as well. And so I'll show you what that looks like. So you still need a static class for it to live in, because this is all just compiler magic to basically build these for you. And you're going to start with extension. And in my case, I want to extend person. And then within here, I'm going to create full name as a method, because what I define here is going to be available throughout here. And so in this way, you're defining something a little closer to what it would actually look like, because we're implying here that this is a member of the instance, not the type. So it's not a static type. If we were to forget and leave this static, which everyone will for the first about 6 months, then this would have to be person dot full name. So you can do extensions on the types, not just the instances. But of course, having a full name as a method, I still hate. But that's what we were forced to do before. But we can now do full name. Now this can just be a property. Make sense? Is anyone already using this syntax? Good. Not good that you're not using, good that it's new to you. It's one of those things I'm going through, I think my main client's still on C# 12 and .NET 8, so sometimes I miss what people are doing. And one of the other things you can do, which to be honest, I'm not sure is new, let's create another set of extensions. And this time, you can do it on generics. So if I wanted to say public int length, which trust me, I know how stupid that is, list.count, right? I could do that and you can have where clauses out here for what the T actually means and all of that. So you're able to do this on generic types as well. Make sense? I also wanted to talk about the new keyword. And isn't this a great place to do it since we have it here. Let's go over to the person class and do it there. So in this case, let's say I wanted to validate that when I set the ID that it's greater than 0. Isn't a great example of why to use this, but it's the one I came up with. So, so I can say return if field is greater than 0, throw new index out of bounds exception or whatever you want to do, return field. Now what this field keyword does yeah, I'm in the setter. Where do you want a colon? I'm sorry. This is what. That's weird. It worked in all my demos. Let me make sure. Yeah. Oh, yeah, of course. Field equals value. Of course, I said field here, and so the field won't be right either. It should be value. I've been doing talks for 25 years, maybe. And I'm sitting here in the front row going, why am I nervous after 25 years? But Gene Hackman, the actor, used to say, if I wasn't nervous, I'd be nervous. So luckily, you all got to see how fallible I am, which really makes me unhappy. So let's talk about name of. We've all used this to say something like person.first name. That works in the way you would expect. And I'll just do right line instead. And right line name of list would require you to have what kind of list it is. But now, C# 14, you can use it as an unbounded collection. So this says list with any amount of parameters is going to get back. In both cases, you just get the word list in this example. So it's not super useful, but in cases where you're taking a different amount of these, this can be helpful to have that option because with the parameter, you could certainly do it before. And then we get to my favorite one. So this person, because we have nullable reference types turns on, is actually going to be a nullable person, right? By default, even though it knew I created it. And so I didn't have to, let's say I wanted to say person dot email equals Shawn at AOL.com. Feel free to ask all of your questions there. I won't get it, but I'm sure there's someone that would get it. I don't have to do any checks because the compiler knows, hey, you just created this person. I know it's not null. But if I say person equals null, then I have to say, and what we would have to do here, assuming this happened in another part of the program, if person is not null, then I could say, this. Come on. All right? And that's ugly. What we can do now in C# 14 is question mark. So what this essentially says is, I will set this if it's not null. If it's null, nothing happens. I'm not going to throw an exception. You should know what your intention here, and that intention is to set it if it's valid. Make sense? So this is sort of the other side of the null reference types that you've been doing in order to access data. This is for setting data. And finally, my favorite or least favorite, partials. We can now have partials. Let's go ahead and make this partial as well. We've always been able to specify things like public string description partial, right? Both with properties and methods, we've been able to set those up. The pieces that have been missing, of course this is going to complain for that, I'm not going to do that, is we can now do it for constructors. So we can say partial person, and of course it'll complain until we have it actually created in the other file. And so if we do ctor partial, and then I can create it here. Same for events. So public event handler. I do so much ASP.NET, I haven't seen an event handler in about 5 years. I would do partial here. Then it expects me to also do it here. Event handler on change. Why doesn't it like that? Oh, yeah, because it's going to want a body. Add. Too many D's for add. Remove. And I could implement this all, but I'm not going to right now. I'm just going to comment it out so we can go on. But that works fine. But it expects you to not just have it. It expects you to implement the add and remove, as well as create your own event handler. So it's of more limited use, but there are cases where this is important. Does anyone use partial classes? Can any of you say why you're using partial classes? Yep, source generators. So if you're not using them, don't use them so you can have the files aren't that long anymore. I separated this class into 14 different classes, 14 different files. Please don't do that. But for source generation, it's crucial. It really allows you a lot of control over what you want to do there. Questions about any of that? Cool. Let's go back to my slides. Yeah. So .NET 10 is the next long-term supported version. So if you're not clear about this, every 2 versions has a longer lifespan of the long-term support version. It's also a short-term support, which 9 was, and 11 will be, and 13, until they change it in about 2 years, and then it'll be something completely different. But assuming they stick with it. So .NET 10 to me is important because it's a long-term support. This is what I'm going to talk to my clients about moving from 8 to 10. I have some risk-averse clients that don't want to move to the short-term. They want to stay on the long-term support as long as they can, and then take the new features from 9 and 10 together when they do that upgrade. Not required. 9 can be published and all that. You just have to realize that it will now go out of 9 will now go out of service when 10 goes out of service. Is that right? Yeah, they just changed it. Yeah, so that the short term isn't as short as you might imagine, but it used to be even shorter. This is a pretty simple maturation, with one exception that I'll talk about, of .NET 10. Most of the things that we need in .NET 10 are there. In Core 2 and 3, we were missing a ton of stuff, and then by 5, we were 90% there. At this point, they're adding features to specific parts of .NET. It's not necessarily a whole new run. We're going to talk about changes in the SDK, in the runtime, and the base class library. We'll talk about the SDK first. So there's a new feature called .NET Tool Exec. And this is an extension to the tools so that you can run a tool without installing it first. This will cache it. It's much like the way NPX works, in that it'll ask you to install it, it'll run it, but you don't need to have an installation project up. You don't need to have a solution file there because it's machine-wide at that time. So for running one-off tools. DNX is the short version of this because they can't help but copy themselves from Node. They've also introduced noun first aliases, which I'll show you. Oh, yeah, those are the 3. So the SDK changes. We're going to love PowerShell for a minute. Oh. I'm just going to create a directory for this. So .NET Tool Exec, and I'm using .NET Dump, which is a tool you might use to look at all the processes on a particular machine. You can see here it's .NET Dump with PS. And it ran immediately because last night when I was testing this and I forgot to delete it, it would normally ask if it was on the machine or not. This doesn't install it globally. So if I do .NET Dump, which is where that tool would be, then it should not work unless I installed it locally by accident. Let me try something. Oh, we only have 20 minutes. I don't want to waste your time on that. Okay. It shouldn't be installing it globally. I'll have to check and make sure. I'll put it in my notes when I publish information about this course. This talk. The other thing that we probably need to be in another project. That's good. Another thing that it does, which is really small but to me matters, is they've added a new add subcommand. Really all this was, so today if you're adding packages or you're adding a reference to a project, you would need to go add reference, .NET reference add, .NET package add. It's a small thing, but just being able to be more English-like makes me happier. So being able to add packages with just add. And this really only works with packages and references, or project references is really what that is. Just a little nicety. And there was one more piece. I just told you. Nope, wrong way. Oh, those were the only pieces. Okay. That's really the big things that have changed in the SDK, are just those new commands. in order to use these, they either need to be the tool exec, they either need to be in GitHub or in a local repository on a machine if it's a custom tool that you're only running. So let's talk about what's next. Datus. Does anyone know what Datus is? I just want to see if anyone's... They're shy. I'm sure someone does. I'm pretty sure. I think that guy does. He knows who he is. So Datus is a new GC algorithm that was introduced actually in .NET 9, but it wasn't enabled by default. In .NET 10, it's enabled by default. So you could opt into this. And the benefits here, whoa, that is not the benefit. No, there's a better way to do this. Is that this new GC option is better at handling a lot of small objects. It tends to run more and let go of small objects faster. And it's really well suited to what they're calling small workloads. So think microservice, container apps, things like that, where the main benefit is a lower ceiling of RAM being used. Before, they would defer to having DCs less often, and that could make the memory grow larger than you'd want on these small workloads. You can turn it back off and go back to GC server, which is most people are using for these kinds of things. But I think you'll find both a performance and especially a memory improvement by using Datus. Yeah, I talked about that. So base class library. These are small, but to me pretty important. So the two that I'm going to cover is this new string orderer. It's like saying fetterer. I don't know how many R's to put at the end of fetterer. And thankfully, if you're using the zip API, you can now do it asynchronously. The idea that they had an API that they built that still wasn't asynchronous just makes me crazy. We won't pretend. So let me show you those quickly. We're about halfway. And so let's set to my little console over here. And the source code will be available after. I don't know that it'll be useful afterwards, but it will be available. So we've got a little list here that's using numbers in the front. And what we know, by the way, is the text big enough in the back? Can you guys read it? Okay. Should have asked that about 10 minutes ago, but if I go ahead and say list.sort, it's going to use a default sort, and then for each I in list, right line, I, predictably, we're going to get this awful order. And everyone probably has a utility that they wrote to fix this a long time ago, but they've now added one that's built in, which I don't know if that's better or worse. But the trick here is that you're going to create a orderer. Let's see how many orderers I can add there. And this is string compare dot create and culture, whatever your cultural info is, but mine's going to be invariant. And here's the trick. This is going to use actually compare options, which has a bunch of these you may have used before: ordinal, ignore case, etc. But there's now numeric ordering. So I pass it to the sort. Ta-da! Everyone's happy. It's the little things that make me happy. They're like, oh, we have a new way of writing web applications. Yeah, but can I have a required constructor? That's a long story. I'll tell you outside later if you're interested. The other piece is, why is my mind blanking? Oh yeah, the zip. So I'm not going to create a whole zip file, but if you look at the zip archive, it now has async versions of create or file. Also has the create from directory, extracted directory, all async. So if you're using this zip stuff anywhere, please go to async and stop stealing my thread. So file-based apps, which technically came out in 9, but there's some interesting improvements that I'll talk about. Anyone used file-based apps? It is pretty new. So let me talk about what it is. That first word in file-based apps is doing a lot of heavy lifting. This is creating a C# file that can run, and it's one file. This isn't packaging up a bunch of files together. This isn't any of that. It's a single file that runs. Top-level commands are normally used. And you're able to write these without having to necessarily compile them. So the changes that are the newest is that they have a precompiler, shebang, and publishing support. So that you can actually, in these 3 cases, you can verify that the code works outside of just looking for squigglies in the editor. Shebang support is really for non-Windows machines, being able to put on the top how to execute this. I haven't gotten this to work in the beta, so I'm not going to show it to you, but it's supposed to. And then publishing support, which I'll show you some of the weirdness about that. So we're going to go here. So here I have app.cs. So all you're doing is really building a file to do things. And if all I wanted to do was say console.writeLine, people.count, in order to run these, here's where they've been hiding it. Not debug console. I just want there we go. If I say .NET run app.cs, it says 4 because there's 4, right? The idea here is that I should be able to have a script. And this is really where I see it fitting in. I moved from CMD to PowerShell, though most of my PowerShell looks like C#. And so to me, this is one more step forward. It does require that my servers have .NET on them, but that's usually a pretty good given anyway. But in this way, we can do some simple things. So one of the things you'll find is that you can use these pound commands or bash, what do you call those? Yeah, you're being very specific. I meant the pound symbol. Hash, thank you. You can add packages like CSV helper at 3.2.0.1. I don't think that's going to be right. I think it's 23. We'll see if that works in a minute. And then we could be using it in here to generate a CSV from here. And that's been there so that you can use, I used the wrong version. Was not, okay, I'll just put 4000. I know there was an O out already. No, it's too many. There's also other preprocessor commands you can do here that are interesting. One is property. And property says anything that I would normally need in a CS proj file, I can do here. So if I do lang version equals preview, that's just saying use the C# compiler, the newest version of that. We'll actually be doing this for a couple of other things. But anything that you're used to being put at, like if you want to turn off null reference types, you could do that as well. The problem with these comes into when you want to actually deliver them and you don't necessarily want to deliver them as a CS. And them as a CS makes me a little even more concerned, except for very internal usage, just because code injection is easy then, right? It's just a text file that you'd be delivering, just like a script would be. And so they've added the support here to publish them. So if I go .NET publish, and I just point at that app.cs, assuming it builds, yep, it'll create an artifacts folder for you that has an exe. Now, one thing that might not be obvious, oh, it's because I'm not using the CS helper yet. Let's go ahead and write that code. We have 10 minutes. Let's not write that code. I just don't want us to run out of time. This builds it with AOT enabled by default and builds it as a single file by default. And so if we come up here, CSV, I picked CSV helper on purpose because it uses reflection. And normally you would get a bunch of errors if you try to use it because AOT removes all of that. So I could put property publish as publish AOT equals false. Let's see if that's the right one. Now you're getting the typical application delivered. You could also say single file and not AOT and get it as a single file again. But you can see this, and you can define, because it's publish, what architectures it goes against and all of that other happy things. So this isn't a big deal in many cases, but when you're trying to get developers, especially new C# developers, to start needing to write scripts to do one of any things or need these one-off scripts, I really like this as a way to be able to just do this in a language that I know, instead of having to search PowerShell space, whatever it is, to figure out what their magic is for, inclusion of files and all that. Make sense? Minimal API improvements. If you're using from form, and this only affects from form, if there is an empty string and the property is nullable, it'll bring it in as a null. Because there's the idea of nullable in things like JSON, and they won't do it for from body, because if you wanted null, they'd expect you to send null. There's no notion of null in form field, so they've added this tiny little improvement for the people that it affects. And they've added validation, which is a nice little piece. It's attribute-based, like we've been using for 15 years, using those same old attributes. I still prefer Fluent validation, personally, but for a lot of people, this will be a big help, especially if they're using writing minimal APIs and they already have these properties on their DTOs and things like that. And server sent events. So I'm just going to cover the last two because they're the easiest. 40 minutes goes really fast. And so here I have, did I put the person separate? No, I put it here. So if I wanted to say required, bring in the namespace, required, that'll be good for now. And I go ahead and run this. And I've already written up an API for posting to this. So I'm posting to to the little in-memory database. If I send that, it'll say created, it made it, everything's fine. If I make these blank, you would expect to get an error, and we don't, because we haven't actually added validation. Trick here is that if the validation is available, it will use it. So it's just adding the services. We restart. And we restart. I don't think you really restarted. Make sure it's not this problem, that I didn't tell it it could be zero length. Well, it's supposed to just work. Oh, yeah. I actually did this on purpose, believe it or not. It doesn't work because in my case, this type isn't public. And the validation, of course, is in another assembly. So it doesn't know it doesn't know how to read them, and so it just goes, this must not have validation information. This is the oldest time problem that to give an external assembly access to it. Then you get the standard errors back from it. Now this is nice, especially if you're working with those. The other nice thing I like is that you can use these validations on your input parameters. So that's that one. Oh yeah, I'll just add it here. So let's say I was gonna make an API for ID, right? And int ID, I could put something like range 0, 100 here instead of necessarily having to do it inside the route. And so this will validate individual properties as well. And so this is probably my favorite part of how this works, because there really isn't a fluent validation way to do this unless you're going to create your own class types. Make sense? And server run. So if I'm doing a call, server send events are a new kind of events where you can create a server to client stream. So when someone calls this, they will they hang on, so almost like a comet call, if anyone remember comet calls. And you're able to push information down. So you can think of, maybe we don't need SignalR because we don't need these 1,000 things. I just need to be able to pump to one caller at a time. You can do this with server side events. And this server sent events. And this is in the HTTP standard. So this isn't something Microsoft's included on their own. They have not made it work in the HTTP files yet. So Postman to the rescue. Nope, yeah. Go ahead and run this. And I'm just making this call to the service. I'm not adding any special headers because the client doesn't need to know how this is being sent. It just knows it's going to get it. And if I send it and the type that's returned is one of these server sent messages, I'll just sit here and it'll continue to send messages. Now, the way this works is twofold. One, the type result that you're sending is actually server sent events. This is not an OK, this is another number to tell the client that this is the type that it's going to deal with. And then I have a background service, and this essentially executes that background service that every 2 seconds I create some magic data from somewhere, and then I'm just yielding the result and then looping, in my case, wait every 2 seconds. But you could do it in a bunch of different ways. So this is a nice way to do it. Was that 10 minutes? Did I miss that? 2 minutes left. Okay. You can, when you download the examples, you can also see the couple of new entity framework tricks. The only one that's super, super interesting is, make sure this is not the before. Liar. 1 minute now. Did I really get rid of all those? The one trick it did that I think is important for you to know, I think I actually already have it in here. Well, there's two things, and luckily they're typed. One is we now have the magic of left join and right join. It can be a really big deal if you need to include things that don't have the join. And you can now do contains in your calls. So if you have, I need to get IDs for 9, 12, and 14, you can now do those and it'll translate them into the correct SQL for whatever database or data store you're using. Whereas before you had to usually write custom SQL to do it, and it's just nasty. because SQL has a construct for this, but Entity Framework didn't support it yet. So it only took 10 versions. So, any questions about any of this? I know we don't have a lot of time and that you're very, very shy. Mm-hmm. I don't know because I haven't dealt with. So the question is in the in the file-based apps, the package format is different than C# Interactive, and I haven't done C# Interactive, but I'm told that it is different. Yeah. Again, you'll see that the format mirrors Node more than it does .NET because it's usually a version.
The hash and the exclamation mark means that they're trying to ignore it. Yeah. So they're using a that's why they use this. So they usually, behind the scenes, they are creating a zip file from those. I hope I can use the same syntax for something like that.
So, any other questions? Okay. But did you get it answered? Okay, good. Well, thank you for having me.